Good afternoon. Welcome once again to another extremely topical and extremely timely EMET webinar. Recep Tayyip Erdogan rose to power on August 28, 2014, and immediately began to transform Turkey from a model of a secular, moderate Muslim ally to a rising menace in the region. Just as Israel is now forced to contend with the Shiite Islamic Republic of Iran, it appears that Turkey represents a threatening Sunni Islamic Republic. Turkey has recently involved itself in conflicts in Libya, the Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, Iraq, and Nagorno-Karabakh. Erdogan is also a huge supporter and friend of Hamas, or the Muslim Brotherhood, and has called for a 1 million Muslim march on Jerusalem. A story came out this past August in Reuters saying that Turkey issued passports to senior Hamas members, some whom have participated in the most notorious terrorist attacks. Who exactly is Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and exactly what makes him tick? What does a Biden administration mean to this Turkish autocrat? Here to answer this question and more is Burak Bekdil. Burak Bekdil is a highly respected columnist and a fellow at the Middle East Forum. He has covered Turkey for the Defense News since 1997, and he had previously written for Harayat, the major Turkish newspaper, for 29 years. He's covered Turkish affairs for CNBC, E-Television, and the Dow Jones Weekly Report. He contributes to annual national defense sector reviews for anti-corruption institutions like Transparency International and Global Integrity. He's a frequent and honest critic of Prime Minister Tayyip Recep Erdogan. Burak writes frequently for Gatestone and a host of other outlets. In fact, it was a column that he'd written for Gatestone in 2001 that led up to his conviction by a heavy crimes court in Ankara and a suspended 20-month prison sentence. He is now speaking with us from the safety of Greece. First of all, Burak, welcome. We're honored to have you. And tell us, who is Recep Tayyip Erdogan? What are his goals and objectives? What makes him tick?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, and thank you to the Endowment for Middle East Truth for supporting this talk, and Sarah for the opportunity, and to those viewing and engaging. I'm happy to be here connecting with you. Well, yeah, I want to speak on the roots of Recep Tayyip Erdogan's understanding of political Islam, and linked to this, his endless wars with the Western civilization and how these two have brought Turkey's huge democratic deficit to where it stands now. We should keep in mind that Erdogan comes from the ranks of Turkey's militant political Islamism that emerged in late 1960s under the leadership of the Ideologue, Necmettin Erbakan, who was Turkey's first Islamist prime minister and Erdogan's chief political mentor. In Erdogan's rhetoric, universal politics is simply about a struggle between the righteous, which is Islam, and the coalition of Zionists and racist imperialists, i.e. Christians. All else is just details in his wording. Well, in this thinking, for instance, the Zionists support Turkey's membership in the European Union in order to get Turkish Muslims to melt in a pot of Christianity. There are no written rules about qualifying an Islamist, but there are strict unwritten rules. So allow me to explain some of them. As we all know, Islam is a religion, but Islamism is a political, social, cultural ideology that claims to have God's unwritten authority to regulate public life, in addition to private life. God's laws, therefore, are above man-made laws, even though they may or may not be in the Holy Script. First rule is to look strictly religious. The shape of your mustache, your regular attendance at Friday prayers, fasting during Ramadan, abstinence from pork and alcohol, which hand do you put on your wedding ring, the kind of music you listen to, your favorite dish can easily qualify or disqualify you from your fellow Islamists. But you must inherently hate the Western civilization to be an Islamist. And here, with the word Western not being a geographical definition. For example, Australia and New Zealand and secular Muslims all around the world are also considered Western infidels. You can cheat or steal, but discreetly. In some cases, your fellow community members will care much, even if you're shamed publicly. There were cases in Turkey in which a respected Islamist gets caught for sexually abusing minors, and his community immediately comes to his help with claims that the man on that dreadful moment had been taken by Satan. You must primarily hate Israel and Jews. The Palestinian cause is your cause. Don't eat pork, but you can eat tons of beef on money stolen from other people or the public. You must not doubt that when Muslims capture foreign lands by the power of sword, this is conquest, a merry event. But when non-Muslims take Muslim lands, that's invasion and oppression. You must believe that Jews never lived in the Middle East. You must believe that Jerusalem has always been a Muslim city since it was built. You must dogmatically believe that a Muslim does not kill, steal, or harm anyone who is innocent. You must also dogmatically believe that the misery in the Islamic world is the result of a Christian-Jewish plot against innocent Muslims. The list could go on, but these are the basics you need to know about political Islam in order to understand Erdogan and his Islamist governance. Erdogan's anti-Israeli, anti-Western speeches can fill several volumes of thick books, but here I will just review a few examples to give you an idea about the religious content. In a 2016 speech, Erdogan talked of European countries, quoting him now here, these are not just our enemies, he said. Behind them are plans and plots and other powers. Also in 2016, he said that jihad is never terrorism. So what is jihad, they ask? And he says, it is resurrection. It is to give life. It is to build. It is to fight the enemies of Islam. That brings us to a third example. He has rigidly refused the existence of Islamic terror. He has argued that the terrorists who kill in the name of Islam are in fact not Muslims, but pawns in a Zionist Christian plot. And mind you, these are not words coming from some medieval warlord. They come from the president of a NATO member state. Sad, but true. In the political battlefield, Erdogan's struggle has exhibited scores of parallels in the methodology of Arab Islamism, whose early ideologues were Hassan el-Banna and Said Qutb. These are heroic figures for Turkish Islamists of the early 70s who successfully imitated the networking and public appeal strategies of these Arab Islamists. Erdogan did so more recently during his path to power, first as mayor in Istanbul in 1994, and then as the unchallenged leader of Turkey starting from 2002. Well, those ideological and practical bonds, including an unrefined anti-Israelism, brought Erdogan closer and closer to modern-day Arab Islamists, Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood. Erdogan's policy calculus at the start of the Arab Spring was unsophisticated, unrealistic, but altogether Neo-Ottoman, an idea based on the supremacy of Sunni Muslim Turks and revival of the Caliphate under Turkish leadership. In this projection, Hamas would be the frontline soldier in Islamists' fight against Israel. Muslim brothers would rule first Egypt and then the Maghreb and Jordan, and Sunni Islamists would also replace Syria's Nusayri president, Bashar al-Assad. That campaign would eventually create a Sunni Islamist belt surrounding the biggest enemy, which is Israel. A Muslim Islamist army, you know, a kind of Muslim NATO, if you like, would finally take the lead in militarily challenging Israel. So that was the plan. kind of a grand design, but that grand design has failed within a decade due to a number of reasons. Why and how? First, Erdogan's hard power projection was based on self-aggrandizing behavior. I recall an American ambassador who, in a cable he sent to Washington, described Erdogan's Turkey as a rover with Rolls-Royce ambitions. He was perfectly right. Secondly, Erdogan miscalculated that bashing Israel in rhetoric, bordering anti-Semitism per se, would unite Arab masses behind him with full support and respect like Muslim Arabs respected or feared Ottoman caliphs. Thirdly, Erdogan thought Arabs, who in fact have bad memories of centuries-long Turkish oppression and colonialism, would greet the Neo-Ottomans with open arms and embrace their leadership. And he mistakenly viewed Hamas and Brotherhood sympathy, solidarity, whatever you call, with him as a genuine, solid, ideological, strategic alliance. It was a no from the beginning. From the Arab point of view, it was a tactical alliance based on hating the common enemy, which was Israel. Well, at this point, I recall a bizarre half-chance meeting I had with a few Hamas and Brotherhood chaps in London over a decade ago. Ironically, the meeting took place at a nice London pub, although I was the only wine drinker at our table. So these Arab fellows looked reserved, but were civilized enough to tolerate my drinking in front of them. So after a lengthy conversation, one of them called me a traitor, a self-hating Turk, and a Zionist. So all four of them were regular readers of my English language column, which you mentioned in your introduction. So I excused myself and wanted to leave, but one of them politely asked me to stay for one final question. Before that, I went to the bar and ordered another glass of Pinot Noir and returned to our table and said, yes, go ahead. So he asked me why I had the habit of calling Erdogan an Islamist in my articles. I first thought I did not understand him. I must have missed something. And excuse me, and Erdogan is, and he said, Erdogan is not even Muslim. I said, what? What makes you think that? Simple, he said. Erdogan wears the Western suit and necktie like an infidel clown, shakes hands with women and claims to be a Muslim. Ha ha, he said. Then I understood about the hierarchy of greener shades of Islam. So Islam, not as a religion, but an ideology, from passive Islamism to radical Salafism. So adherents of every small compartment in that often violent ideological spectrum had the right to declare others as non-Muslims. For the Salafis, the other radical jihadists are not Muslim enough. For the jihadists, Hamas and Brotherhood are not Muslim enough. And for Hamas and Brotherhood, Erdogan is not Muslim enough. And it goes on like this. So not to mention for Erdogan, secular Muslims like myself are not Muslim enough. As if all these guys come up with a built-in Muslim meter. That was a precious lesson I learned at a table meeting at a London pub. So I asked the gentleman, what brings you good Muslims together with Erdogan, who you say is not even a Muslim? What brings you into such a loving alliance with him? And they said, it's not an alliance. We will support him as long as he fights the common enemy, Israel. When I met those gentlemen, Erdogan was at best terms with other Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, and others. So today, not even his anti-Israeli policy rhetoric could save any of those past Arab friendships. On the contrary, Erdogan's policy, which was primarily based on internationally isolating Israel, has eventually isolated Turkey. You may ask for some evidence. Well, today Turkey does not have ambassador-level relations with Egypt, Syria, and Israel. And it's the only country in the world that has no ambassador-level relationship with all these three countries at the same time, Egypt, Syria, and Israel. That's weird. Turkey has no diplomatic relations at all with Cyprus and Armenia. It has problematic to Cold War level relations with Iran, Iraq, Greece, and Lebanon. Well, Gulf heavyweights, Saudi Arabia and UAE have recently imposed official boycotts on Turkish goods, not to mention a dangerously fragile modus operandi with Russia and increasingly problematic relations and often tensions with the European Union. That's isolation in the perfect sense of the word. Turkey is the odd one out in NATO. It is too, well, it's a kind of identity crisis. Turkey is too Muslim to be part of the Western civilization, and it is too Western and non-Arab to be part of the Arab-Muslim civilization. It is too Sunni to forge an alliance with Iran, and too Muslim to fight Iran for stronger Western security. Well, this is an identity problem augmented by 2 decades of Islamist rule in the country. And that picture and majoritarian, not pluralist Islamist thinking has inevitably created a huge democratic deficit. One reason why I'm in my home, away from home in Greece now. Unfortunately, Turks have many good reasons not to be proud of their country's current standing in wealth, democracy, civil liberties, and justice, with barely $8,000 of per capita income. Turkey is a country of 83 million people, excluding 4 million also Syrian refugees. Freedom House has put Turkey in its not free list of countries in its 2020 assessment. And that may come as a surprise to you, but not to us. Some of the other countries in Turkey's democracy grouping include Afghanistan, Angola, Belarus, Brunei, Chad, Djibouti, Eritrea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Myanmar, North Korea, Nicaragua, Qatar, Rwanda, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. And according to the World Justice Project, Turkey ranks 107 out of 128 countries on rule of law. According to Reporters Without Borders press freedom ranking, Turkey is at the 154th place out of 180 countries, scoring, this is important, scoring worse than Pakistan, Congo, and Bangladesh. These are gloomy facts and figures to make one unhappy and sad about his country, and I'm not the only one. There's evidence that one recent research has found that 38% of Turks, 38%, nearly 32 million Turks say that they do not belong to their own country. That percentage is 51% for Turks who consider themselves modern. Even a quarter of Erdogan's voters, according to this research, feel that they do not belong to Turkey. This is not a seasonal political anomaly, but it is rather a fundamental, unsustainable anomaly, possibly worsening every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have just a few questions to open up. We know that President Trump has prided himself on having a very tough sanctions regime against Iran. And in today's news, he said he's planning to slap a, quote, flood of new sanctions on Iran between now and Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20th. And we know that for some reason, Turkey has evaded sanctions under the Countering Americans' Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, CAATSA. Why is this?
Somehow, I mean, the whole world was shocked at the highest point of diplomatic crisis between Turkey and the United States. I'm talking about October 2019. Suddenly, Erdogan decided to visit Washington and have a meeting at the White House with President Trump. When everybody else was predicting like a perfect storm was in the making, Trump came out of the meeting, hailed Erdogan with very generous words. And then the news began to flow that he somehow suspended Kağıtsa sanctions against Turkey as big due to Turkey's acquisition of the Russian-made S-400 air defense architecture. That was kind of unbelievable. I mean, it went against the natural flow of things in life, in politics, but it happened. And then it surfaced that President Trump also gave orders to kind of cover an investigation against the Turkish state lender, Halkbank, on charges of evading sanctions against Iran at the tune of $20 billion. That's a serious accusation. And normally, in the normal course of political life, I mean, a country who has committed these two big sins should be punished, if not militarily, by sanctions. But mysteriously, Trump, who has apparently a personal attachment to President Erdogan, preferred the other way around. So he was missing one very important point. The only feasible way to keep Mr. Erdogan's policy at least in relative line with the Western interests is the threat of sanctions. It could be EU sanctions or American sanctions, but sanctions, because Erdogan's biggest fear is to lose power due to an economic crisis, an economic crisis ignited by foreign sanctions.
Right, okay. And can you tell us a little bit about Halkbank and what kind of relationship they have with the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Halkbank was kind of one-stop shopping center to avoid sanctions. There were some Iranian Turkish businessmen engaged in this plot, funneling funds from one country to the other, funneling gold from one country to the other. But eventually, the US the investigators found out that just one Turkish bank, it's a state-run bank, evaded US sanctions at the tune of $20 billion. And at the center of it was just one Turkish-Iranian businessman whom several years ago, President Erdogan and the Turkish government declared as an economic national hero. The same man who pleaded guilty as part of an investigation in America was put to jail. Somehow, I guess he got some kind of a pardon. He suddenly disappeared. I'm not sure if he's still a suspect in the case, but that case must go on equal grounds and according to the principles of the US Constitution and free from any presidential influence.
Right. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about Erdogan's response to the Abraham Accords and Israel's relationship with the UAE and Bahrain?
Well, it's so funny. I mean, it's like a joke. It's like a joke, When the UAE decided to normalize relations with Israel, Erdogan's government's first response was that the UAE is betraying the Muslim world and then this is a treason, and how come a Muslim country can set up diplomatic relations with Israel. One thing he did not say, and his government did not say, was that Turkey itself has had diplomatic relations with Israel for the past 71 years. And it was the first Muslim country to have established diplomatic relations with Israel in 1949. And then Erdogan's own media accused the UAE of a second wave of treason to the Muslim world by saying that, okay, the UAE has now allowed air traffic to and from Israel, and then the UAE would allow its own airspace to be used for that. And Turkey was furious about that. Again, nobody knew that Israel is one of the 138 countries which has a civil aviation accord with Turkey. So, on the one hand, Turkey is accusing the UAE for normalizing ties with Israel on two grounds. For establishing diplomatic relations, and then allowing airspace use, both of which was basic tenets of Turkish diplomatic life. Turkey, okay, no ambassador level relationship we have with Israel now, but Turkey has had diplomatic relations with Israel since 1949.
Right.
This is hypocrisy in the extreme, I'm sorry.
Hypocrisy, right. As you know, Turkey has purchased the S-400 missile defense system from Russia and has a very interesting relationship with Russia, yet it's considered a NATO ally. I personally find this rather difficult to swallow. Can you explain first Turkey's relationship with Russia and its relationship with NATO?
Well, as I said, I view Turkey as the odd one out in NATO. I mean, Turkey is a de facto non-NATO member, although it is officially a NATO member since 1952. This is a complex web of relationships. Turkey is a slave to Putin in its relations with Russia since 2016, when ironically, this time Russia imposed economic sanctions on Turkey. It really brought Turkey on its knees, economically speaking, and Erdogan had to apologize for shooting down a Russian fighter jet in Syrian Air Force the previous November 2015. Right. So since then, Turkey has been too much scared of another Russian embargo, which makes Turkey a kind of a hostage to Putin. And Putin has been very successfully abusing this situation. So I would call Turkey's, apparently brilliant relations with the Kremlin as a tactical alliance in conflict, because Turkey and Russia are on the opposing sides in Syria. They're on the opposing sides in Iraq. They're on the opposite sides in Libya. So what do they have in common? It's basically trade and strategic relationships. And Putin has been very successfully using Turkey to create cracks within the NATO alliance. And he has been doing this very successfully. At the same time, making his country make billions of dollars. You mentioned the S-400 deal. That's $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion, and that system, Turkey cannot even activate. So Turkey paid $2.5 billion for a system which probably it will never use. And that cost Turkey its partnership in the US-led multinational consortium that builds the next generation fighter jet, the F-35. So Turkey also paid more than $1 billion to get its F-35s, which was suspended, rightfully suspended, because S-400 and F-35, I mean, you can't have them on your soil at the same time. You have to choose this one or that one. Right. So this is not a rational policy. You see, I'm talking about more than $3.5 billion gone into wastebasket in one move.
Okay. I have to say I'm very proud of EMET because we did work very hard to educate members of Congress against the sale of F-35 to Turkey, and that was one of our proudest moments.
You should be. You should be.
Right. Right. As you know, since the decapitation of the teacher Samuel Paty in France, because of his determination to have a class on freedom of speech, and he showed the illustrations of Muhammad from the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, the Muslim community throughout Europe and much of the world has been up in arms because of French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron's determination to weed out Islamist terrorism and Islamist separatism. How has Prime Minister Erdogan's response to this contributed to the violence by some Muslims and the ensuing terrorism, which has resulted in the deaths of 3 French people on Nice and 4 Austrians in Vienna?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to understand that Turkey is not Afghanistan. There's some sort of a state functioning within the limits of, okay, good or bad, but in the Western way. So the official Turkish response to that was condemnation, a sincere condemnation. Again, if you remember my episode with my Hamas and Brotherhood friends in London, there's a difference. Erdogan is not trying to start a wave of violence. He's not a terrorist. He's an Islamist, but he's not a terrorist. So I think he's sincere in his condemnation of this act of terror, both acts of terror. But what he is not sincere is that I don't think he was really sorry about Paty, because an Islamist is a man who should be privately happy about the punishment given to some infidel who committed the crime of blasphemy. So that is punishable in the Islamist thinking. It's a very thin line of understanding. You see, Erdogan would never, I think, resort to terrorism himself if he were not the president of Turkey, but an ordinary Islamist. He wouldn't advocate taking up arms and killing people, but I don't believe he's sincere in feeling sorry for the French teacher.
Yes, yes. And he has made some very insulting remarks about Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Well, he had to, because it's typical, it's vintage Erdogan that this is, well, there the target is not Macron or a few years ago it was Merkel, and then a few years back it was the Dutch government. He must create enemies to keep Turkish voters united behind him, to give them the image that Turkey is surrounded by infidel enemies, and Erdogan himself, he is the defender of the country against these infidels. So the story goes on and on. He must have these infidel enemies at all times. I mean, it was France last month, now it's Armenia, next month we don't know. A few months ago it was Greece, and then Cyprus. That is, standard tactic to provoke some kind of national sentiment that would benefit him with the image that he is the defender of Muslim Turks against infidels.
Fascinating. Okay, now I'm going to hand the podium over to our very lovely Director of Communications, Sarah Leah Thompson, who will read the questions that have come in from the audience.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Burak, for all your insights. We have gotten a lot of questions in, and as usual, we won't be able to answer all of them, unfortunately, but we'll do the best that we can. So the first question we have, How is Turkey viewed by other Sunni nations?
Well, Turkey is having a very difficult time in its relations with other Sunni Arab nations. I would categorize Saudi Arabia as a Wahhabi Muslim nation rather than just Sunni. Yes, Sunni, but Wahhabi Sunni, which is a different thing. Turkey is having deep problems with Saudi Arabia. As I mentioned in my speech, Saudi Arabia is one of the Arab countries that officially imposed a boycott on Turkish products. That feeling, the Saudi feeling against Turkey, Saudi hostility against Turkey, is also based on the notion of common enemy. In this case, the common enemy is the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Turkey's ally. So if the Brotherhood is your ally, you're my enemy kind of thinking in Saudi psyche. And then we have Egypt. Egypt is the most populous Sunni Arab nation in this region. Erdogan again showed his inability to bet on the right horse, if you like the term, when he, in order to protect and pretend that he's the leader, somehow the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood thinking, he too much invested in the Brotherhood movement in Egypt, including giving safe harbor to senior Brotherhood figures in Turkey, allowing them to broadcast from Turkey, to do propaganda from Turkey. So that inevitably created a deep hostility between the Sisi government in Egypt and Erdogan. And Turkey is not the most popular Muslim country for the rest of the Sunni Arab nations at all, except perhaps the Qataris and the Palestinians. When I say Palestinians, I mean Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you. The next question. Do you think that there would be a possibility for normalized Israeli-Turkish relations like there previously were?
Well, the previous one, 2016, was not a real normalization. It only lasted for a year and a half, maybe less than that. Well, that's a very good question.
Yeah, but prior to Erdogan's rise, there were very warm relations between Turkey and Israel. Excellent.
I mean, before Erdogan, Turkey and Israel were real strategic partners. I mean, that was more than excellent relations.
Yes.
And, there was intelligence cooperation, military cooperation, and trade blooming. It was an excellent relationship. But it was inevitable that Erdogan's Islamism would hurt that relation, and it did. Well, going back to the question, I think there must be one attachment to the question if Turkey's relations with Israel will normalize. The attachment required there is the timeline. So if I should answer the question, because political crisis, diplomatic crisis, I mean, ups and downs, of course. One day, relations between Turkey and Israel will normalize, but when? Okay, I don't think they will normalize as long as Erdogan is Turkey's leader and president. That is an ideological barrier to normal relations between Turkey and Israel. So I don't think in the real sense of the word normalization, relations will normalize between the two countries as long as there's Erdogan in Turkey.
Thank you. We've received a number of similar questions regarding a secular Turkey, and we've compiled them into the following. What are the chances that Turkey will ever be led by a secular government again? How many Turks are secular? What would the status of the reputation of Ataturk today be? And lastly, what percentage of the Turkish population believe Erdogan's statements and beliefs? And I can repeat some of those later.
Okay, well, tricky question, but good questions indeed. Yeah, Erdogan basically, in practice, what he did was a kind of, and successfully, very successfully, I must admit, a kind of counter-revolution of what Atatürk did 80 years ago. So in Erdogan's thinking, he was undoing what Atatürk did, and which was based on the idea of creating a modern secular state. But ironically, that modern secular state produced members of the society like Erdogan and his followers. There's an irony there, which is perhaps demographically explicable, but I'm not sure again. Well, going back to the question, the biggest damage Erdogan did to Turkey, I think, is that he has successfully created a kind of transformation, political transformation of the Turkish mind, the average Turkish mind. I would think in the next decades, when he has left the political scene, the Turks will still be looking for another conservative Muslim nationalist leader for themselves. The only chance that things can a little bit normalize in Turkey is if Turks, when they choose a conservative president after Erdogan, if they choose a liberal conservative one, well, there are many candidates. That would be fine to normalize Turkey, to take Turkey back to a parliamentarian system rather than this strong one-man show, the presidential system. Again, the part of the question was, I think, the percentage of people who believe in Erdogan's propaganda. I would say, unfortunately, we don't have credible research on that. I can't give you figures. I can only tell you that empirically speaking, well, we know from the vote breakdown that at least 40 to 50% of Turks are pro-Erdogan, which means that 40 to 50% of Turks believe his propaganda. I would also say that another 10%, 15% nationalist Turks, not Islamist, but ethnically nationalist Turks, would also take his nationalist propaganda. So I would think empirically about 60-65% of Turks are under the influence of his propaganda machine.
Thank you. The next question we have, Israel has so many Turkish products, from pasta to appliances. Would you be able to comment on the balance of relations that are politically so low, yet economically so high?
Well, that's the fascinating thing about business. You know, Turkey's, I don't have the figures with me now, but I know that Turkey's trade volume with Israel, two-way trade volume, must have increased by at least 200% after the Mavi Marmara crisis in 2010. So it's like, you know, Moses is Moses, Jesus is Jesus, business is business.
Thank you. The next question. It seems clear that Erdogan has visions of restoring the Ottoman Empire and that the empire would not be fully restored without having Jerusalem within its empire. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think Erdogan can be, he's not an idiot. He's a smart guy. He's a political wizard. He's not a totally ignorant person. I don't think he ever dreams of that. I mean, he's running a big country in the Middle East and in his own terms very successfully, uninterrupted for 18 years. And he's a success story. We cannot deny this. But I tend to think that his rhetoric about liberating Jerusalem is for domestic consumption only. I mean, he knows the military balances in the region. He knows that he cannot send one single Turkish soldier to the Israeli territory. He cannot do anything in his wording to help the plight of Palestinians. He says the Palestinians should have their own country and its capital should be Jerusalem. But he knows that he cannot take a move, a concrete move, to achieve any of these declared goals. So I would think that's for domestic consumption only.
Thank you. Do you think that Erdogan is spreading himself too thin by being involved in too many conflicts at once, including Libya, Syria, Azerbaijan, Cyprus, and backing forces against Egypt and Israel, among
This
others?
is part of his Neo-Ottoman policy. I mean, he, first of all, ideologically, he believes this is the right thing to do for Turkey. And on top of that, he calculates that reviving this Ottoman soul, that Turkey is militarily present in former Ottoman lands, is his way of luring the average Turkish voter. And when I say the average Turkish voter, the average Turkish man is a kind of, ideologically speaking, he's a blend of Sunni Islam and nationalism, Turkish nationalism. So these are all music to his ears. I mean, the Turkish average voter.
Thank you. The next question we have, Biden's foreign policy is anti-Turkey. Do you believe that Biden will change the American policy and decide to apply sanctions on Turkey?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on American politics, but a piece of news I read today, one of Biden's top advisors, I guess, Mr. Carpenter, said that sanctions to devastate Turkey's economy are out of the question, which I think is not a good start to keep Turkey in the Western Bay, anchored to the Western Bay. It's not a good start, and it's not giving us hopes that the new American administration, by opting for pragmatism rather than realism, because when you're dealing with a leader like Erdogan, realism is one thing, pragmatism is another thing. So I know it's difficult to find a balance in between two, but I'm worried that Erdogan, the political wizard, can, in the course of time, find out ways to buy the Biden administration.
Thank you. The next question we have, does the resignation of Erdogan's son-in-law as Minister of Finance signify a crumbling of the Turkish president's inner circle or the beginning of Erdogan's end?
No. No, on the contrary, it has the potential to bolster Erdogan's administration, because the son-in-law, the finance minister, was the center of lots of, how shall I call it, palace intrigues and power struggle within Erdogan's inner circle. Now that he's gone, might bring some peace to these palace struggles. It may also, if the Turkish economy's command is left to able hands, it may also improve Turkish economy's performance, which is very bad at the moment. So this is definitely not the end of Erdogan's term, and it may even bring him extra votes. That, I mean, if his voters were wary of this son-in-law, whose management of the economy was a disaster, they may even be happy that Erdogan, he was such a brave leader that he even sacked his own son-in-law.
Right. Thank you. The next question we have, Could you comment on the future of Turkish-Iranian relations? Aside from differences between Sunni and Shiite Islam, they both seem to want to dominate the Middle East and Muslim world, and yet they seem to be cooperating in several respects.
Yeah, well, simple. If you look at the past 20 years between Turkey's Sunni Islamist administration and the mullahs in Tehran, you can see what the next 20 years will bring. We have to remember the fact that the Turks and Persians have never fought a war since 1639. And the Turkish-Iranian border has been one of the most stable in the world history. The Sunni Turks, like Erdogan, and Shia mullahs in Tehran will keep on privately hating each other, but will not openly do anything that would be considered hostile to each other. So this kind of the parody, the play, the theater they have been acting on stage for the past 20 years will probably be projected into the next 20 years. Turkey will never be an open enemy of Iran, and Iranians will never prefer to be an open enemy of Turkey, but they will never be privately, they will never be friends, because for the Sunni Islamists, Shia is a corrupt version, deeply corrupt version of Islam. Sometimes even they consider it as worse than an infidel faith.
Thank you. For our next question, could you please describe the current situation in the Eastern Mediterranean and the gas resources? It appears most countries are lining up against Turkey's actions.
Yeah, well, it's relatively quiet these days, although Turkey today declared another NAVTEX, a navigational telex system that you have to declare for mariners in the area that you will go on for your exploration activities. This is a story that will continue on with ups and downs and more tense and less tense moments in the next couple of years, until there is a solution. And I guess the solution is somehow the Western powers involved in this hydrocarbon game, when I say Western powers, including Israel, they should decide whether they should unite their forces to exclude Turkey from the whole game, or give it a role, or negotiate what that role should be. There's not a consensus yet, because with Turkey or without Turkey options will bring into the picture the necessity of an economic assessment. This is not only a political thing. So definitely the without Turkey option is the more expensive option, but with Turkey option is the less stable option. So the Western coalition, including Israel, should first decide and really decide how they want to move forward from this point on.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions. In the last municipal elections in Turkey, it seems that Erdogan's party has lost power. Is this a hiccup or a trend, in your opinion?
Is this?
A hiccup or a trend?
Is it something that's like an outlier? Nothing,
right.
nothing.
Yeah.
A fluke.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand. Okay. It was a warning to Erdogan. Not an ideological warning, but it was a warning to Erdogan that even his own supporters they started to complain about the economic performance. Only this year, the Turkish lira has lost 40% of its value against the dollar. It's the biggest loser against Western currencies this year, the Turkish lira. So it was a clear warning to Erdogan that masses want and expect from him something better in economic management. So it all depends on how the economy performs between today and when Turkey goes to elections.
Thank you. And the last question we have, How long will Erdogan stay in power, do you think? And what will happen to him after his presidential term is up?
Well, difficult question. Well, it's a difficult question. Okay. Uh, Let me try to answer by giving you the current picture. If there are elections in Turkey tomorrow, presidential and parliamentary elections, forget parliament, we have the presidential system. So if there are elections in Turkey tomorrow, Erdogan would definitely win, despite the economic chaos and everything. There are different reasons for that. One is ideological, the other one is because the opposition has not come up with a feasible, with a credible alternative to Erdogan so far. But we have 2 years to go for the elections, almost 2.5, okay. If the opposition cannot unite, the whole opposition to Erdogan cannot unite behind one single plausible candidate until then, they will definitely lose against Erdogan in the next elections. From a broader perspective, I would predict that this may be the last time Erdogan wins a presidential election in Turkey. Because of his age, he's young, but he will have to start preparing for the post-Erdogan era now. He may choose one of his sons-in-law, he may choose another one as the crown prince, but he hasn't yet given any indication as to who he may select.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, and in that intriguing note, I want to thank Burak Bekdil, who is actually one of the world's preeminent experts on all matters Turkish, and for his sage wisdom, really. Thank you. I have to say that this is about our 40th webinar since the pandemic began. All of this costs EMET a great deal of money, but we feel it is very important because we feel that a well-informed public can translate to well-informed policy decisions, especially in a democracy. And, you know, we are at a point where we are going to be reaching the end of the year and Giving Tuesday, and we need your support. So if you have enjoyed the tremendous wealth of wisdom from our wonderful speakers, such as Burak Bekdil and so many others, I would ask you to go to our website at www.emetonline.org and please support our organization. COVID-19 has unfortunately hit some of our rather large donors, and we have had to really tighten our belts, but we are going on nonetheless, and we are going to keep informing the public and educating the public and our members of Congress. You know, so thank you very much. Next week, if you could tune in, we the same time, same place, the 18th at 12 noon Eastern time. We are going to have Itamar Marcus, who is going to be talking about what the Palestinian view is of the new Biden administration. And thank you again to Burak Bekdil and to Sarah Thompson and my wonderful EMET team, and to all of our listeners for tuning in today.
Thank you, everyone.